And verse 6 again is a very well-known verse. You'll see it on all these little bookmarks and things like this, and cards, don't you? And when I was at a church, there used to be a chorus with this in as well. It's the words of this verse set to music, and people you were encouraged to actually sing it to people. I've been it's quite embarrassing really. People at front say, right, turn to the person next to you, remember those kind of times, and sing this to them. And it was this, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it, or will complete it, until the day of Jesus Christ. So this is the first real statement that Paul makes, which is quite a statement, isn't it? Paul is confident of this very thing, this precise thing, that he, obviously God, which has begun a good work in you, will perform it, he will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. So Paul is very confident about that. Not quite so confident when he comes to the Galatians, though, is he? Remember, when we studied Galatians, he said, talked about them having suffered so many things in vain. Galatians 3:4. So why the difference? Why is he so confident with the Philippians that God is going to complete this work within them, and yet he doesn't seem so confident with the Galatians? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Is it anything to do with when he wrote them? Sorry.
No, go on.
Is it anything to do with when he wrote them? The timing, because things changed, or was?
I don't think so. I don't. That's not what I would say.
And is the clue in the verse 5? Partnership in the gospel. The problem with the Galatians is that they'd fallen for Judaizers.
They had.
So they'd fallen out of the gospel.
Yes.
The gospel is about grace.
Yes.
And yet here Paul is saying grace to you, you know.
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail on the head, I think. I mean, my understanding of it is, if you come to verse 7 here, it says, even as it is meet, that is, it is right, for me to think this of you all. Now this is the word here, because. So what he's saying is, I'm confident this very thing that he's begun a good work in you will perform to the day of Jesus Christ. It's right for me to think that, because. So now this is the reason. Okay, this is why he's confident this very thing, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my bonds and in the defence and confirmation of the gospel, which you were saying, yes. Ye all are partakers of my what? Grace. Yeah. So what Paul is saying, and by the way, notice Paul is in bonds. When he wrote this epistle, he was a prisoner in Rome, and he's saying, look, in effect, you've become partakers of my grace. You've been my partners in the gospel, and even though I'm in chains and you're not, in spirit you're in chains with me, because they were giving him support. They were with him in spirit, upholding him in prayer and so on. And he's saying, look, I'm in partnership with you. I'm in fellowship with you. And he talks about here the defence and confirmation of the gospel. And as Matthew was saying, the Galatians abandoned the gospel of Christ and had a different gospel, didn't they? They'd started off right. They'd started off in the spirit, Paul says. So they did have salvation, and yet he said, are you now trying to work it out in the flesh? You're trying to go to good works, thinking that you're going to please God by doing good works. Have you forgotten that you were saved by grace through faith? Excuse me. So what he's saying here is, this is why I'm confident, is because you have stood in defence and confirmation of the gospel. In other words, they had been tried, that they had endured, and they'd come through and they were still loyal to the gospel. They'd still endured. What is it? Ephesians 6 talks about having done all to stand. stand. You have to stand, right? And you have the armour of God. It talks about, the helmet of salvation, knowledge of salvation, breastplate of righteousness, and so on, the shield of faith, sword of the Spirit, what is the belt of truth, the feet shod in the preparation of the gospel of peace. So all this armour that you have, God has given it so that you can stand. And the Philippians have stood. They stood the test. They stood the endurance. And Paul's saying, I'm confident because you are partakers of my grace. You partaking of the same. See, that's what the grace of God does, is it enables you to stand, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And that's what grace is for. So you will stand in that day. And as we were discussing, Mike, just earlier, about, is it inevitable you will sin? Well, God's grace is such that he has made provision for you that you can resist temptation, that you can be an overcomer. But then it's down to you whether you take what grace has offered. And someone once said, faith receives all that grace has offered. So it takes faith, I was talking to a chap today. Ironically, he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't. He was very anti-God, and he said, I just can't believe all this stuff. Ironically, his name was Christian, but he sat there with a bottle of Stella or something, was swinging it away on the bench. Only a young lad, and he was saying, "Oh well, if I could be saved, I'd be saved right now." I said, "Well, you can be." He said, "Yeah, but I just don't believe in it." I said, "Well, then you won't get saved because it's through faith, And so grace offers salvation to the whole world. Are they all saved? No, because they won't receive it through faith. They won't exercise their faith to receive that. So I think that's my understanding of that verse, that being confident of this very thing, that God will perform it. In other words, He will do His work with you and complete it. He won't leave it unfinished. Is that they had stood the test, that they'd been tested and they'd endured and they'd continued in that gospel, and they were continuing in the grace of God, as we looked at in the first epistle of John. Yes, if you abide in Christ, you will not sin. You have to take yourself out of Christ. You have to turn your back on God, and then yes, you will sin. But if you abide in Jesus Christ, then no, you won't sin.
This is the doctrine of Christian perfection, of entire sanctification.
Well, it's the doctrine of, don't use the P word if people don't like it, but yeah, there is a school of thought that talks about perfection, that comes from the Bible verse, be ye perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect, or be ye holy as He is holy. You've got to make sense of those verses.
It's related to the holiness movement, is that right?
No, that came later, quite a bit after that, really. But it's the understanding that you can walk in complete obedience to God should you choose to accept the grace that God has offered. So, for example, the Bible talks about when we are tempted, that we are never tempted beyond what we can bear, and that when we are tempted, God makes a way out for us. So bearing that in mind, I spoke to a chap about this once, and he was saying, yes, I agree in theory. Yeah. So I said, well, what use is theory in the Bible? What's the point of God inspiring His word and giving us theories to work to? Surely it has to work practically, otherwise it's just exercising your mind.
What did he mean by that though when he said that?
He meant he couldn't deny what the Bible taught, but he himself didn't believe it. No. That's how I would interpret what he said.